Hey everybody, Star 6 Wars 1 here, and today we are here to talk about how I feel towards all 4 of the Persona 3 movies. I've made no secret that I love Persona 3, from its characters, to its story, to the OST, and to its social link gameplay. Persona 3 is one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite video games that I have played thus far, only rivaled by its sequel, Persona 4. But that is a different topic for another day. Back to Persona 3. So when I first heard Persona 3 was getting multiple movie adaptations, I was naturally excited to see all the aspects I love about the games put into movie form. Whether it worked out in the end is what we are here to talk about today. One thing I do want to say before we go into the rest of the video, because of how the movies are, I will not hold back on spoilers for this video, so if you haven't seen the movies or played the game, I recommend not watching this video. Unless you don't care about spoilers and just want to hear me talk about these movies, then by all means stick around as I discuss my feelings towards the Persona 3 movies. Spring Rebirth is a strange entity among the movies because for the most part, it's mainly a fan service movie to the people who have played the games, with a few new additions or changes sprinkled here and there. Firstly, let's talk about what the movie did right. To start this off on a positive note, the atmosphere, coloring, and scenery give off this really kick-ass feel. They managed to capture the look of each major scene from the game and make it translate to animation very well. However, what I feel they captured the best in this regard is easily the Dark Hour. It's unnatural, ominous, and unsettling, exactly what the Dark Hour is supposed to be. I love how they use the coloring during the Dark Hour to add even more to the atmosphere than they already have. I'll even go as far as to say that the Dark Hour looks even better here than it does in the game. This extends to Tartarus, which looks pretty much like its game counterpart, minus the somewhat tedious dungeons. Another pretty big positive to note is the music in the movie. While 80% of the music is straight from the game's OST, there are a few original tracks in here, and I feel they fit right along with the rest of the game's OST pieces. This is helped by the fact that the music in both was done by the same person, Shoji Meguro. Since I was already a huge fan of Persona 3's soundtrack, I'm happy to see these songs again, as well as some new songs to boot. I think now, however, is a time to go into what doesn't work about Spring Rebirth, with a few more positives here and there. For starters, I missed the social links with other people outside of C's. I know with the movie's length, it was probably a better idea to cut the ties with them and keep them as cameos only, but that doesn't stop me from missing the other links that we could have had. My next problem is unfortunately the story, or more specifically how the pacing is all over the place. Most of the major moments from the game that are covered in Spring of Birth are covered good enough, but sometimes it feels like it's simply trying to get from one plot point to the next, with little time for certain characters to grow, while other times it does the exact opposite, by giving time for characters to grow and interact. As a result of that, the pace of the movie feels weird and disjointed for me. Another thing I have mixed feelings towards are the main characters. Junpei is fine for who he is in this part of the story, and I liked him enough. Akihiko and Mitsuru, on the other hand, I feel like they don't contribute much to the movie and feel underdeveloped, but they're not bad either, just not utilized the best. Then we have Fuka, which I gotta say, I like her quite a bit in this movie. Her personality is more or less the same as her game counterparts, however, they gave her a lot more scenes than she had in the early game, which adds to her character, I feel, and I can appreciate that. She is probably the best character in Spring of Birth, if I'm being honest. However, sadly, now we get to the worst characters in the movie, Yukari and the main character Makoto Yuki. Yukari in this movie, for lack of a better term, is kind of bitchy and annoying. She's rather unlikable and hard to listen to because half the time she's on screen, she's just complaining or bitching at Junpei and Makoto, or the both of them at once. And I find it tiring after the first bit. However, my main problem with not only the characters, but the entire movie, comes in the form of Makoto Yuki. Holy crap, do I find him boring and rather unlikable. He has almost this unending boredom throughout the movie, and it gets old to see very quickly. Worse yet, the creators didn't give him many other expressions outside of that boredom. However, what cements my disliking of Makoto over Yukari was a scene towards the climax in the movie. So, Fuka is stuck in Tartarus and sees needs to go and save her. And at first, Makoto agrees. However, Yukari opens her big mouth and says if Makoto doesn't care to help out, he shouldn't go. And you know what? He says understood and doesn't join in trying to rescue Fuka, who by this point is an acquaintance of his. Whereas for everyone else, she is a total stranger / possible recruit. I'm sorry, but in my book, that is a ripe royal dick move. I know he comes eventually to save the day and all, but at first he wasn't going to do jack shit, and had to have a talk with Pharaohs before he did something. And you know what the worst part of this is? None of this is in the game. So essentially, they made Makoto an asshole for no reason. Like, what the hell, creators? So putting everything I have said about the movie thus far, as a starting point of these 4 movies, Spring of Birth is very rough around the edges. While it's got a decent amount of positive aspects, I think its negative points really hamper and hurt the movie overall. Something I did bring up earlier is that Spring of Birth is a fan service movie to Persona 3 fans. Sadly, because of that though, I feel like it's not very accessible to newcomers, and I could see them not liking the movie, and honestly for good reason. Though for Persona 3 fans, I find it harmless enough, problems aside. Is it a good movie? No. Not really. It's not terrible and it could have been worse, but it's not really that good a movie either. If you haven't played the games, I'd recommend skipping this movie, at least until you've played them. Okay, before I go too deep in the movie, I just want to say this right now. Movie 2 has by far the dumbest name of the bunch. I know each of them are puns on the season, and that is fine, but this one is not only hard to say, but I keep mixing up the name calling it Midnight Summer's Dream instead of calling it what it's actually called, Midsummer Night's Dream, which, while a nitpick, does bug me about the movie. As far as the movie itself goes, let's just dive into what works. 3 positives I mentioned back in the Spring of Birth section, those being the coloring, scenery, and music, are still positives here and in the next 2 movies, so I will not beat a dead horse by talking about them again here. While not as much a positive, 2 of my major problems for the previous movies, those being Yukari and Makoto, have improved. Yukari has been toned the hell down for her bitchy and annoying moments, except for some minor stuff in the beginning, but we'll get to that little gem later. Makoto has gotten easier to deal with in this movie. While a lot of times he still has the same bored look, he shows far more expression and doesn't have any "you are a dick" moments. He can still be a bit of a bore to watch, but hey, that's an improvement over how I found him in the first movie, so we got that at least. The final big positives to mention for this movie are 3 characters: Akihiko, Ken, and Shinjiro. I mentioned in the first movie Akihiko didn't contribute much and felt underdeveloped. Here though, his bond with Shinjiro and greater presence gives Akihiko a bit more to do, which is nice as he's one of my favorite members of the cast. Speaking of Shinjiro though, he is fantastic, partly for the same reasons as Akihiko, but with an added few bonuses. He goes through a character arc of accepting what he has done in the past. You also get to see moments of him being a really nice character despite his rough exterior. If I'm going to be honest, Shinjiro is my favorite character in this movie for those reasons, and is probably my favorite thing about this movie. Finally, we get to Ken. Ken in the games is easily my least favorite member of C's, and possibly the entire game. I found him annoying and unpleasant during certain times of the game where he really should not have been annoying and unpleasant. In the movie, however, for some reason, I like him a lot more. I feel they tone a lot of his worser traits from the games down, and added in more of his likable traits, turning him from one of my least favorite characters to one I decently like. So kudos to the movie there. Sadly, however, this is where my positives begin to end and the negatives start showing their ugly face. The characters of Junpei and Mitsuru are about the same as the last movie, and while in Junpei's case that isn't a totally bad thing, unfortunately he and Mitsuru aren't given much to do in this movie, which is a shame as both are great characters in their own right. Fuka, unfortunately, takes a major nosedive from how she was previously. Mainly, it's because, like Junpei and Mitsuru, she isn't given a lot to do in the movie, outside of her job in the original game, which was analyzing shadows, which amounts to basically nothing. Which, again, really sucks, as I liked her in the last movie and wish she got a better role than this. However, the biggest offender for not given much to do in this movie is the 3 members of Strega. Now, I know this is a movie adaptation, and I know that you can't completely follow the source material. In fact, for some things, like with the social links, it's better you don't follow it. With Strega, however, what they changed made them from intimidating villains to a non-presence only there because of their role in the game. I feel like their screen time was either cut in half, or sometimes they feel like their scenes just come and go out of nowhere and it hurts the movie further. However, it's not just story that is hurt with them, it's them as characters as well. For example, Jin, while not the most notable in the game, basically does nothing of brain porns, which is even less than his game counterpart somehow. Like, how do you screw that up? However, he is not the worst. No. That goes to Chidori. She loses in the movie a pretty huge plot point that makes her become a completely non-existent character, which really angers me because it's important for another character's growth as well as her own. At least she's fixed in the next movie, and I'll get to that in a little bit. The only relevant Strega member in this movie is Tayaka, who can be a very love-or-hate character already. Not helping him is Strega's almost random placements throughout the film. Overall, it's disappointing to see Strega more than it is satisfying. However, the biggest problem with movie 2 is quite easily its story. The problem isn't so much the events of the story, it's more how it's handled and paced. The first 30 minutes feel incredibly rushed, trying to shove in the battle between the Hierophant and Lover's Shadows, the fan service moment between Makoto and Yukari, the introduction of Strega, the beach trip with Seize, the introduction of Aegis, the explanation of the origins of the Full Moon Shadows, finding out what Strega is, Yukari finding out her dad was directly involved with the Shadow Project, having Yukari and Makoto's big scene, and a big action scene with Aegis against some shadows, all in the first 30 fucking minutes. This all could have been its own movie, but no! It's shoved into the first third of this movie, and after that, the pace of the movie slows down and gives the rest of the movie to the Ken and Shinjiro storyline with some Aegis scenes and Strega scenes here and there. Now, to Spring of Birth's credit, it had weird pacing, but it never felt like it was shoving events down your throat, unlike this movie, which shoved the first 30 minutes down, then adding on the other plot points till the events of early October in the movie. As a result, there is way too much going on, and it's very hard to follow the events of the story, or in some cases, care what the hell's going on. At the end of the day, movie 2 feels like a 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of movie. On the one hand, it handles certain characters very well like Shinjiro and Ken, and it improves on characters I previously hated like Makoto and Yukari. However, its problems outweigh the good. Its flow is god-awful. Strega feels like an afterthought, and it ends on the worst possible spot you can end your Persona 3 movie on. As a movie, it's a mess. And as a Persona 3 movie, it's disappointing to watch. Definitely a low point in the movie so far. So, after the bad taste in my mouth that was movie 2, we get to the third movie in the series, Falling Down. Like with the previous movies, let's talk about with what works first. For starters, the pace and flow of this movie is a million times better than movie 2 and movie 1 combined. This is due to the fact that, for one, not as much plot is crammed into the movie as last time. It's also helped by the fact that there isn't any weird slowing down and speeding up or rush beginnings, then slowing down, unlike the previous two movies. Another improvement of this movie is actually Makoto, whose distance and cold attitude throughout the movie is understandable and sympathetic given the previous film's events, as well as some during the early parts of this movie. He finally doesn't feel like he's just an empty shell of a character, but instead his own character. Why it took 3 out of 4 movies for that to happen is anyone's guess, but he could be bad in all of them, so I'll take what I can get. Also, unlike the previous movies, the entire cast of Falling Down feel like they contribute to the movie. Oh yeah, some get more focus than others, but none of them feel like just a simple afterthought, and all of them have their time to shine. Something else of note is I find the main cast rather likable in the movie and enjoyable to watch, including some I didn't like previously, like Yukari. For another improvement in the movie is Strega, which, while they don't appear as much, they do leave a much bigger impact. However, my favorite aspect of Fallen Down is Ryoji. Holy shit, I love this character! He was good in the game serving as a friend for Junpei when he was having some tough times. However, in Falling Down, he is a friend for Makoto that opened him up again after Makoto tried to shut everyone away so he wouldn't be hurt again. This is the best role they could have given it, and it just emphasizes the relationship that Ryoji and the main character Makoto should have had in the games, but didn't. Instead, that was regulated to Junpei. But here, we get good shit with Ryoji. He's also rather likable and enjoyable to watch on his own, much like the games. He's a wonderful addition to Falling Down, and a welcome addition to the movies in general. Sadly, however, the movie does have its faults. For starters, its beginning feels like you're being thrown into a battle with not much context, much like the second movie. However, unlike the previous movie, it ties how the second movie ended into how Falling Down begins much better. However, the biggest problem with Falling Down is that 2 of the plot lines in the movie don't convey the emotional impact like they were supposed to for me. Those being Ikutsuki's betrayal and the romance of Junpei and Chidori. The problem I have with Ikutsuki's betrayal is that he was given so little time in the previous movies and only served as the expositionist. His betrayal feels much more hollow than in the game, as there, he was a bad jokester and he felt like he was looking out for the team as a teacher or even father figure. So his betraying the team and turning out to be a megalomaniac was a shocking plot twist. In Falling Down, though, his lack of presence in the previous movies makes his betrayal, as I said before, feel empty and hollow and not giving the impact it should have had. Now, going into the problem with Junpei and Chidori's romance, I want to say right now, my problem isn't the romance itself, as I think for what we were given, it was believable and charming in its own way. My problem is seemingly that it comes out of nowhere. In the game, it started around the midpoint of the part movie 2 adapted, whereas in the movie, it's only in Falling Down, and it's not given the backbone it needed as a result. Again, the romance isn't bad. In fact, it's pretty good. I just feel it needed more time devoted to it than the movie could give. It's funny, but the 2 biggest problems with Falling Down more or less have to do with the first 2 films being weaker and hurting its emotional impact of some of the events of the movie. However, on its own, I actually really liked Falling Down and consider it to be a good movie. It served the fans of Persona 3 well, and what it did change turned out pretty well. Overall, while movie 2 was a low point, movie 3 Falling Down was definitely a high point of the movie series so far. After Falling Down, I became excited to see the 4th movie, Winter of Rebirth. As for how it turned out, well, let's get to the positives. Makoto in the movie continues his train from Falling Down of being a great character in his own right, and has evolved into a more likable and understandable character rather than the empty asshole he started as in Spring of Birth. We finally get to see Elizabeth outside the Velvet Room, and she is glorious. We get to see that she has an odd sense of what the human world is like. I personally find this charming because of how much she enjoys everything she's experiencing for the first time. Is she understanding everything? No, but she loves every second she can experience something new to her. For me personally, I love every moment she's on screen, and she was easily the highlight of the movie for me because of how fun and energetic she was. The final positive I'm gonna give the movie is the last 40 minutes of the movie, from the final battle to the credits. I enjoyed it a decent bit, if nothing else. Now let's get to the negatives of this movie, because there is no shortage of problems in Winter of Rebirth. For starters, I have a problem with Makoto fighting the Nyx Avatar alone. Even though the movie does give a believable reason as to why they couldn't help, I still feel like we got gypped from seeing C's fight for their lives trying to beat Nyx as one, rather than Makoto alone. I guess you could see this problem more as a nitpick than anything else, but it's something that does bother me quite a bit. However, it pales in comparison to the big problems with the movie. The rest of the characters that I didn't mention in my positives, the tone of the first hour of the movie, and the lack of emotional impact the movie has. First, let's start with the other characters. Outside of Makoto and Elizabeth, no character was all that fun or interesting to watch. Granted, their situation was dire, and I get why they might have some problems, but I feel like they were overly angsty. What's worse is, I feel like they had to learn the same lessons that they learned only a movie prior. It feels like a slap in the face to the previous movie's events, because it feels like they learned nothing and regressed as characters rather than progressed. They also contribute to my next big problem, the tone of the movie. The tone of the first half is overly dreary and depressing. The game too was dreary and depressing at this point as well, but it never wore out its welcome, at least for me. This movie, on the other hand, weared it out very quickly. It felt like a slog to get through, and it drained a lot of my enthusiasm for the movie, which says a lot, because not even movie 2, in all the moments it pissed me off, did that. I'm just thankful Elizabeth showed up at the 35-minute mark to have Winter of Rebirth burn my dread, because I was quite sick of it. However, even then, near the end of her time on screen, the movie gets overly sappy and tries to become happier, but it feels cheap because you don't feel like the movie earned it, and like a second slap to the face of how sudden and drastic the change is. It does settle into a more satisfying last 40 minutes, but man, does the tone beforehand suck. This all comes to a head with the final and biggest problem with not only Winter of Rebirth, but the entirety of the movie series: its failed attempts at emotional impact. When you get down to it, Persona 3 is an emotional journey, or at least that's how I see it. Getting to see these characters go through hardships, but becoming better people on the other side of that. You grow attached to these people and can sympathize with their plights, but also cheer them on when they grow from their problems. I'll admit right now, they aren't perfect and are not always executed with the grace they should have been, but I have great love for Persona 3's characters and still hold Persona 3's story as one of my favorites because of how everything tied together, and while it ended sadly, I felt like I'd gone through an experience I can only have once. It satisfied me in a way few other pieces of media have. The emotional impact that I have with Persona 3 is one of its strong suits, and it makes it very special to me. My biggest problem with the movies is that, for the most part, the movies lacked all of that. Falling Down did do a good job with what little it had to work with, but the other movies felt hollow. Even if you take away everything I've said about the Persona 3 game, then the movies still feel hollow. Yes, the movies have some good in them, and I'm willing to notice and embrace them, but outside of movie 2 and maybe Spring at Birth's better moments, I don't feel they are good movies. Their characters range from good to dull to annoying to downright awful. The story's pace and tone are all over the place, and to top it all off, it doesn't give the emotional impact I wanted out of these movies. Winter of Rebirth is the worst of the movies, because it expects you to get an emotional reaction out of the viewer when it didn't earn it. Falling Down, for example, wants you to feel for the characters as well, but it gives time to show off what these characters are really like, and by the time the emotional moments come, you already care about the characters. This is not the case with Winter of Rebirth. It does jack all and expects you to care instead of growing to care about them. I think that's what I hate about Winter of Rebirth the most, and makes it the worst of the Persona 3 movies by far, and one of my least favorite movies, period. So, after all is said and done, I can easily say that Persona 3's movies as a whole are more than a little disappointing. However, they still have some highlights throughout. When going back to see Falling Down, I was very pleasantly surprised that I found a genuinely good movie which captured what I liked in Persona 3. If the other movies had been like Falling Down, then I at least think they wouldn't have been what they ended up being. Still, I am glad I got to see these movies again, because in a weird way, they reminded me of why I loved the game of Persona 3, even if the movies, particularly movies 2 and 4, sucked the big one. So, what do you all think of these movies? Did you hate them all? Did you think they are better than I said about them? Or do you agree with what I said about them? Let me know in the comments below. I'd like to hear what you all have to say on them all. Anyways, that's all for me. This has been Star 6 Wars 1, and I'll see you next time.